Hello. Today I am going to be giving you a reading and perhaps small discussion of a part of a poem from María Baranda, the book Nightmare Running on a Meadow of Absolute Light, translated by Paul Hoover and published by Shearsman Books, a fantastic supporter of translated literatures based out of the UK. This is from the first of the two long poems that comprise this book, and the title for this is To Hell. I'll be reading the first few pages of this poem, but it doesn't especially have breaks or segments, and so there isn't a natural stopping point. So really this is going to end when the vibe does. This begins with an epigraph from Gongora of its horrendous voice, not its inner sorrow. A cry. Just a cry, a single cry to the open air, a cry of porpoise or dolphin, of incandescent fish by the water, a cry of the sea that breaks and repeats, that empties and in the time of salt says everywhere what it says, that swells, that glows, a cry, a single cry, just a cry of the blue, inconceivable sky that repeats, that advances, that grazes among the algae, the fetid rumor of the brackish, a providential cry in the voice of air, an unsustainable rhythm in the throat, a cry that knots itself in symphonic circles of joy, a terrible cry that announces the first death, that stands on precarious feet and dismantles shadows and grumbling, a cry that must choose, for between the walls the liquid deepens, the wall as a cardinal point, an agonizing smile in the punctual sweetness of the one who is drowning, a cry disbanded in a garden with thickets, a dream of blue light for the birds, a cry that in itself is the size of the sea and lives at the center of rapture, and with each step it yields to the delirium of a sponge that inflates in sweat and gives glory to the time of silent prayers. A cry is the cayman's vigil, the unleashed whip of an ant, the fan of, yes, the same immaculate air of an inhospitable grudge that bends. The cry that smells of salt, a wild beast dry, horny, in the dusky collapse of your herd, the cry distilled from minutes marks the world that is world forever, in an open moment where never passes nothing, and everything dissolves, hurling itself to the bottom. Nothingness is reason falling, finally its emptiness, its bend in the road most refreshing when the tree is erected in delirium, in order to sing from its purgatory, its novice illusions, almost vertigo. A cry is sleepless in its dream, faded, almost hoarse, it stuns itself like a crippled animal. The cry breathes sleep inside its eyes and evokes a sacrifice, a dark joy and a spiral of weeping. The cry moans, weeps, wallows, glacial, polygamous, decrepit, sinking into flakes and scales into mud. The cry sleeps alone in the hollow of useless blindfolds, its intoxicated pallor, in its cadence and fatigue. It buzzes between the glasses and the cans. The remains are still ripe, and the sweet song of the flies to vacancy. The cry is deeply in love, and sweet together with the soft soul's rose to call it rose is a corrupt luxury, a brief heart that detracts. The cry is the insistence on misery, is the sharp bite of hunger under the yoke of a sugar mill, a fire burning among dogs and rats, is a shadow that crosses the fetid waters of wonder. And it's the clamor of 3 nights, of the sickness of women, hens, and female deer, when the Gods lose their harmony and quickly offer their shame to the twilight. The cry is air, air that only blossoms in the half-light of funerals. The cry is the voice of the obsequies, a wafer in the pupils, which praise be to God, without God, silent cry, infinitely bitter and dry, and the newlywed God, the round impostor, who belches, who vomits, who repeats, fragrant at the pit, and doesn't say not to purify the skin, devour candles and beautify, blind beneath the definitive sun, lethargic in the accounting of a glass-beaded God's summit, red-hot, incredulous God who doesn't ask for pardon in the omen of dead birds. A cry, just a cry, a single cry. It whips and lines and looks dissolved between the vertices of song, sings among the captive petals, and don't forget me in the diaspora, sing deadly like an archangel about to shout his song. The cry is erased between the breasts that slander, sinks, convenes, seizes, becomes, and is consumed, penetrates, licks, fits, in cartilage of fire where it resides. So I wanted to read this poem, partially because I think María Baranda is just a very interesting and evocative writer, always kind of playing in the lyricism, unafraid to, I guess, let the lines wander away from her, sometimes too far, at whatever risk it is of losing to that edge of, lyrical madness that exists in the outer realms of poetry. But also because the subject of longer poems, in my, I guess, encountering of them, is always so fraught. It's very difficult for me to I've always read poetry. I've always enjoyed poetry, and poetry that you often run into these days is, a page or less, sparse lines that don't cover the whole page. And when you're faced with the longer poem, it's making a very declarative statement toward the affect on our reader and all that it aspires to. I think with this poem in particular, there are kind of two conceits that long poems tend to make for a reader. One is either almost like a linear narrative for the reader to follow along with, and the other is a delight in sound, in the sonic. And I hope I was able to convey in the reading of it quite how special the sonic is in this poem. And need I remind that this is a poem in translation, which means that there is a sonic quality to this poem written entirely in the Spanish that will carry forth entirely new dimensions for anyone lucky enough to encounter that. But if you haven't encountered María Baranda's work, please do. And I hope you have a good time listening. Thank you so much. Take care.